You're listening to Inside Outside Innovation, episode 66. David Robertson, author of Brick by Brick and formerly at Wharton, just recently accepted a new position at MIT's Sloan School. He also hosts a podcast of his own called Innovation Navigation that's available on Sirius XM channel 111. David and Josh sat down to talk about what third wave innovation really is and examples from GoPro to Lego about the possibilities for success and failure that go along with incremental innovation. You can find David's contact information in the show notes and more details about his podcast. Hi there, everyone. I'm Victory, the producer of Inside Outside Innovation, the podcast that brings you the latest insights from people who know the most about building lean businesses, innovating within corporations, and disrupting industries with passion and precision.
If you had to start to put together your first list for the greatest topics that you need to bring to executives, what would be on that list?
Oh, I would like to talk to them about the ideas in the book. I mean, I would like to talk to them about how every innovation leader needs a complete toolkit of different types of innovation. You should know what disruption is and how it works, and you should be comfortable putting a team off in a separate building to think about disruptive influences, disruptive future technologies that could affect your business. But you should also be, looking for blue ocean opportunities and continuously improving your current technologies and maybe looking at a lean startup that could affect your business and looking at innovating around your current product to make it more compelling.
And I think that's one of the things that I appreciated about your book, Dave, is that we have the groups who will talk about and put structures of Horizon 1, 2, and 3, or at least trying to bucket them into 3 different areas. But then in practice, what I see a lot of organizations do is just say, it's a lot easier to talk about core or sustaining innovation and disruptive innovation. And whether you would agree or not, what I felt one of the things that I really appreciated about what you're doing is almost championing some of those adjacent type innovation things that are kind of in the middle that are very much that innovation around the core product, whether it's things around the experience that they might do or other ancillary things around the product itself. Do you think that sometimes gets overlooked, kind of that middle ground of innovation?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. I think far too often. And it's the fault of people like you and me, people who write about innovation and do podcasts about innovation and speak about innovation. And too often there's just too much of this talk about disruption and revolutionary innovation. And I think that is an important type of innovation, but I think it's relatively rare. I mean, how many stories of disruption can you tell? Once you've exhausted the Kodak and the Encyclopedia Britannica there's a few that we always hear, but they're few and far between.
I completely agree. One of the things, especially when we think about that middle ground of innovation that I love and that you have gotten quite a bit of fame for is your work on Lego. Could you just share a little bit more about some of the things that fascinate you most about Lego and maybe some of the lessons that innovators could apply from that? Yeah,
so this new book came out of the Lego story, and it really was in response to kind of a challenge that I would get, which is how would we do what Lego did? And when I really looked into what Lego had done and tried to say, this is their approach to innovation, I saw a lot of other companies doing it too. And so, I think Lego is this wonderful Greek tragedy of a company that rose up and then did so well for so long and then got complacent and even arrogant and then fell because of it and almost died and, almost went bankrupt in their case, but learned something from that brush with bankruptcy and came back stronger than ever. And that is the arc of a typical Greek tragedy, but it's also the arc of Lego. Or another way to put it is that, Lego hit on this formula for innovation after trying and failing at every other way of innovating. So,
sure.
You got to give them credit for, they've tried everything possible. And the thing that really seemed to work is this type of innovation that I talk about in the book.
Absolutely. You also draw some great contrasts in the book of thinking of how you might go about not just completely inventing a new category, but kind of the story on GoPro, right? And how they looked at particular innovation around the camera space. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think GoPro is a wonderful example of how a innovation leader needs to really understand different types of innovation, because they start off as one type of revolutionary innovation, which is not disruptive at all. It's more blue ocean. And by that, and literally, right? I mean, it was started by a surfer who wanted to capture his greatest surfing adventures. And so he creates this waterproof camera and a way of strapping it on his surfboard. And so this idea of having a video camera that was rugged and waterproof was satisfying a need that nobody had satisfied before. So it was blue ocean type of Horizon 3 innovation, satisfying a need that nobody had satisfied before. And so he did really well, and GoPro did really well in its early years. But then they started doing what I call the third way innovation, not incremental and not radical, but just innovating around the product. And so created a whole set of different mounts. So you can put a GoPro on your surfboard, but you can also put it on your helmet, on your chest, on your dog, on your, and just about anything. There's a GoPro mount that will help you mount your camera on it. And then created software so that you could take your footage and turn it into a great music video, and a smartphone app so that you could control the camera, and then a social media site so you could share your great adventures and even make some money if they were especially good. And so all that really created this whole portfolio of innovations that let them hold off competition from Sony and many others. And so this kind of second phase of GoPro's life is this 90% annual growth of sales from 2010 through 2015, where, Sony made a better camera. It had more pixels, a sharper picture. It had noise reduction, image stabilization, and it was a third cheaper than GoPro's. And they're getting killed by GoPro because they didn't have all the other stuff around the camera. They had a better camera, but they didn't have a better total offer. And so that let GoPro win against the competition during kind of the middle phase. But now I think you're seeing something genuinely disruptive happening as smartphones become more rugged, become genuinely waterproof, get more memory, and get better cameras. You're starting to see a smartphone substitute for a GoPro in terms of, you could strap it on your chest and capture your great adventure. You could strap it on your surfboard and capture your greatest adventure. And so all of a sudden they're getting disrupted. And so it's a third type of innovation. We're back out at Horizon 3 again, where GoPro really has to rethink who they are as they get disrupted by this technology that was completely inferior just a few years ago and now is rapidly pushing them out of the market. And so I think they're a great example of one company having to master three different approaches to innovation, two of them pretty radical, and the third less radical, but just as difficult.
And so I want to touch on that third one there a little bit more, especially for our listeners here, thinking about innovating around their product or their solution. What are some of the starting points where they could start to figure out where the best opportunities might be and how to really make sure that they're not identifying things that are around their product that might be fool's gold?
Yeah. The first question you want to ask there is, what is this product? What is the product that we want to innovate around? And it's almost a question of where are we not going to innovate. It's a question of, what did we do yesterday? What are we going to do today? And what are we going to do again tomorrow? What's that product or service that made us great and that our customers are counting on us for? And start with that decision about, what's not going to change, because I think that's a much more stable base to build your innovation efforts on. And then the next question is, what do we do? Like, what do our customers want from that product? For GoPro, they didn't just want a rugged waterproof camera. They also wanted to be able to mount that camera, and they wanted to control it, and they wanted to take the raw footage and turn it into a cool video, and they wanted to send it to all their friends or display it to the world. And, they wanted a lot more. And so the second question is, what are your customers trying to do with your product? How do they get value from it, and how can you help with that? And then the third step is finally to innovate, to finally once you've got a clear understanding of the context that customers are using your product within, then, well, what can you do to make that product more useful, more valuable, more compelling for your customers?
And I think I don't know as much of Sony's foray into the space as you do, but when I think back to your second question, and I think of a Sony competing there versus a GoPro competing there, that true trying to get out there and understand about what their core customer is trying to actualize in their life, right? Well, who are they trying to become and what are they trying to do? And building the brand and the product and all of the related accessories and experiences and websites, et cetera, around that product, it just feels like it's much more in tune. And I gotta think that lends to the success of something like a GoPro. And that probably if I'm thinking about this next wave and as phones potentially take over a nice portion of their market share, I got to be thinking about, I would go back to, again, who are the people who are still using what we're using and what else are they still trying to do in their life, right? What are the things that they're still trying to accomplish that we can continue to be the catalyst for helping them actualize those things?
Yeah. And, think about it from the other standpoint too. So put yourself in the position of this product manager deep within the bowels of Sony, who's been given the challenge by their boss to create a better action camera. Mm-hmm. And, that they're given this narrow mandate, and maybe they realize that they're doomed from the start, but either way, they go off and they do what they're asked to do, which is create a better action camera, which they do, and they create it for less, and they bring it to market, and it fails because it wasn't about the camera. It was about, how do you use that camera to capture your greatest adventure? And, the question is, whose fault is that? Yeah, mm-hmm. Right. Who, I really feel for that product manager. I've been that person, that product manager. And, you work hard, you do your job, and it fails, and you get blamed for it. It's, puts kind of a stink on your career. Sure. Where it really was the manager's fault who organized that project and set that product manager up for failure.
Well, it makes you start to think that, when we think about real far out there, Horizon 3 disruptive information, the approach to that, I think it's much more acceptable to say, yeah, let's do a carve out team. Let's give them autonomy. Let's let them look at the whole business venture in and of itself, right? And get out and understand customers, et cetera. But many times in large organizations, exactly like what you're saying, it may be to them just an iteration or an adjacency to an existing product. But if they don't take that same sort of holistic view and get the right resources that are in there to be able to help them think and iterate and understand, it could equally be as doomed, right? It isn't just the fifth generation of this next camera that they need to do, but there's probably some of those things that we can borrow or learn from the structure of how people are doing carve-out groups or carve-out corporate startups or labs or whatever you want to call it, and maybe even bring some of that a little bit closer to the core business.
Yeah, and it may actually be one of those things where getting really good at one thing makes you less good at another. In other words, I don't know that if this is true for Sony or not. I can only kind of look at this from outside. I could not get anybody out to go on the record about this, but maybe they have just a really good, disciplined product development management system. Mm-hmm. And so it sets things up so that the teams have all the resources they need and the team members they need and the goals and the targets and the business case and everything else. And it has turned product development to this finely tuned machine that works. But, they're bringing a knife to a gunfight. I mean, they're creating a product when it's not about just the product, and they're losing with a superior product because that's the terms of competition in the market.
I think you nailed it there. And it reminds me of a Steve Blank quote that I read recently of that everything that makes you an amazing, efficient machine at executing your current business model is the antithesis of what you need over there, right? In terms of the innovation, truly. And that may be a little bit strong because I think there's definitely good stuff, but you absolutely do need to think about the flexibility that's in the product development process, the flexibility in who you're putting on those teams and the autonomy you give them, even how you compensate them or reward them. There's a number of those things that have to start to be looked at across the board to maybe, I don't even know if you can say it, optimize for innovation. That's almost an oxymoron there. but being able to optimize for the chance of finding something of greater value that maybe is different than what you have today. So Dave, as I think about, you talk about the different areas of innovation, and that for new innovators, they really, what you wish that you would bring to them is helping them get a complete toolkit within their organizations. One of the questions that we get quite a bit is around almost a layer above that of the management of these different areas. We have people talking about innovation portfolio management, growth boards or governance boards, or other ways to be able to try to say, we're going to enable the organization to be lean and fast and nimble, yet we still need this check or balance on the top that allows us to have innovation governance or other things to be able to move it forward. Do you have any thoughts or comments on how organizations just getting started should look at this approach to managing innovation across their horizons or across the different tactics or practices that they're using?
Oh, yeah. This is one of those things where as soon as you use the G word, the governance word, people's eyes glaze over and they quickly fall asleep. But it's just one of those things that's so important. And, I think it is the job of the chief innovation officer to set up the governance structure and get it working, and then work themselves out of a job. Like Tim Cook famously said, if somebody has a chief innovation officer, that's a sign that they don't get it, that they don't understand innovation. And in a way, that's half right and very dangerously wrong, because I think any company that's trying to move from a very simple view of innovation, like let's take what we did yesterday and make it a little bit better for today, that's a good place to start. But if you want to have a bigger toolkit, you're going to have to get more of the organization involved in innovation, which means that you're going to need a cross-organization governance system, which means you're going to need, just forums and processes and policies and all that stuff, that boring stuff that goes along with governance. But if you don't get that, then it's not clear who's making decisions, who's funding the efforts, who gets the benefit of the revenues and so forth. And the whole thing can fall apart pretty rapidly. And so I think it's one of those things that's just not talked about enough, but it's tremendously important.
Mm-hmm. Where do you get started? Because I've also seen executives get excited because they hear process or they hear policy and they're like, oh, I know how to do that stuff. So what's the first bite of the elephant that organizations should take as they think about that?
Oh, I think do it small, right? I mean, just take some important but not central product and just think about, okay, so how are we going to do this better? And so if you want to explore this type of innovation I talk about in the book, then by all means, find an important product and do it once, right? And kind of set up the governance that you need just for that project in a temporary committee. Mm-hmm. And then once you've had some success with that, then start to expand it, do it again, maybe do it for a different product line, and build up over time until it becomes clear to everybody that the current structure isn't quite working and that you have to do something different. I mean, structure and process are and should always be trailing indicators of innovation success, right? I mean, and that can be a really hard thing to overcome, that you set up your innovation processes and you set up the structure and the roles and so forth around the last successful innovation your company had. Mm-hmm. Well, if you want to do something different, well, that's going to get in the way of it. And that's what one of the things that makes innovation so difficult. But if you've got a governance system that governance is basically just a forum where people can propose new things and get approval for it. If you've got something like that, then you have a chance of succeeding, at least in a small way. And then if you succeed in a small way, you can succeed in a larger way and so forth. And then you've got a chance of really making a difference.
Dave, I want to ask you a question about your book that I love asking authors. Is there a part that you think is either underappreciated? You thought it was going to resonate even more with people and you still think it should, and you want to make sure you get it out there. Or on the flip side, something that's really surprised you, something that has really resonated with people that maybe it almost made the cutting room floor, and you're really glad that it's in there now.
Well, I think nobody reads chapter 7 of a book, and I've started, whenever I read a new innovation book, I make it a point to try and read chapter 7, just because it often takes a while to work up the argument and put things together. And, it's often by chapter 6, 7, or 8 that you really get to the crux of the book, the important new things. And that to get there, you often have to reread a lot of the same stuff that everybody already knows. But if you're an author, you want to put together the whole argument, even if some of it is building on what somebody's already said. And so I think the idea in my book that gets buried in chapter 7 is this whole idea of what's the business case? And the whole idea that if you want to have multiple different types of innovation, that can be a very low risk, high reward approach to innovation. But you've got to set up the business case correctly so that you can have local investment targets, but global profits. And that's so important.
That's the end of another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. Big thanks to David for sharing his expertise. We'd love to connect with you through Twitter at the IO Podcast or on our website, insideoutside.io. If you've got a minute, leave us a review on iTunes, because what would a podcast about innovation be without iterations based on customer feedback? Until next time, go out and innovate.